Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ECITB second Virtual National Forum. My name is David Nash. I'm Director of Strategy and Policy, and it's great to see so many of you on the call this morning. Before we start, can I just go through a few housekeeping items? So all attendees will join automatically with their cameras off, and your microphones will all be on mute. To sort of control the settings, the orange arrow at the top of the control panel allows you to hide and expand the panel. And the audio settings should be set automatically to computer audio, but it's worth double checking this. As we have a significant number of people on the webinar this morning, can I ask that you ask any questions that you have of our panelists via the question box in the control panel. Type in your question and press send, and that question will go directly to the organisers and myself, as I'll be chairing the Q&A session later on. No other participants will be able to see your questions. I should also say finally that we will be recording this session, so if you have any difficulties at all during the session, we will be uploading the webinar afterwards to our website and you will be able to watch again then. Okay, I think that's all from me. I'd now like to hand over to our chair, Linda Armstrong. Linda.
Thank you very much, David. So as David has said, I am Linda Armstrong and chair of the ECITB, chair of the board. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this national forum today. I look forward to hearing your views and feedback on training needs today. But I first wanted to take this opportunity to take stock of where we are and briefly look ahead of what's to come. I think most important, later in this year, in September and October, we will be consulting with our employers on the levy. Now, ahead of that, we will hold a series of strategy consultation workshops led by a member of the board to understand the challenges faced in each of your sectors and the key issues that the ECITB should be addressing. The final strategy workshop will be with government to ensure that they understand the skills challenges our sectors are facing, and of course for us to understand what the key government priorities are. You'll hear much more about the detail of these plans later in the morning. I don't need to tell you, all of you that are on this forum, that 21 was another challenging year for the industry as the impact of COVID continued to be felt. But in spite of that, we had a number of positive announcements from the government regarding the targets for transition to net zero, which is 2045 in Scotland and 2050 across the rest of the UK. The government announced the two carbon capture clusters, HyNet and the East Coast cluster. With HyNet in the Northwest, we will see a collaboration of organisations undertake a project which will combine hydrogen production and carbon capture with the potential to cut the region's carbon emissions by 25% in just 5 years. That's the equivalent of taking 4 million cars off the road. And the East Coast cluster will be an alliance between the Endurance Partnership, Net Zero Teesside and Zero Carbon Humber, with the aim of removing nearly 50% of all UK industrial cluster CO2 emissions. Excellent targets. The anticipated activity across the Humber and Teesside is expected to create and support an average of 25,000 jobs per year between 2023 and 2050. So careers in the popularly labelled green sector will appeal to a generation of socially and environmentally responsible new entrants. And the ECITB will play a pivotal role in aiding our sectors with the attraction and retention across this strategy period. And in parallel to this, we know there will be substantial opportunities to work on decarbonising existing sites, such as oil and gas platforms, refineries, power stations. The board recognises the ECITB has a vital role in enabling the transfer of workers between the industry sectors and upskilling to new technologies. And of course, at the same time, addressing the ongoing need to train and develop a workforce that's capable of designing, constructing, operating, maintaining, decommissioning, and ultimately decarbonising. However, we also recognise it's not all about net zero, and our industry, along with other sectors of the economy, are facing growing pressures from an increasingly tight labour market. All the evidence points to demand and competition for new entrants is escalating. Balancing access to opportunities for the individual and access to skilled labour for the employer will be key to achieving success. And in response to this, the ECITB scholarship scheme is designed to provide employers with the opportunity to recruit new entrants who have had their training either to be fast-tracked into an advanced stage of an apprenticeship or recruited directly on site. We've also been focused on the transferability of the workforce by closely collaborating with industry partners for competence assurance programs. I think many of you will be familiar with our Connected Competence program. So, recognising the complexity of the road ahead, we will continue to increase our dialogue with the governments of Scotland, England and Wales to be able to tackle and articulate the skills challenges that we all have to address. For us, our position as government-facing advocates of the energy construction industries has never been more important than now. So Chris will elaborate further about these plans in a few minutes. But I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to recognise the value of the ECITB and the levy that has the value that they've provided to industry in the last 12 months. And many of you will be familiar with the programmes that we've had over the COVID period. I think that the most familiar one is the Train to Retain, and that's provided unprecedented support to organisations at the risk of losing organisations who could have been at the risk of losing apprenticeships and graduates during the pandemic. Securing the future of our workforce remains our greatest priority as we move forward into the new strategic period. Now, I look forward to speaking with you all soon as we embark on the strategy workshops in spring. And I wish you great success for the year to come. So I'm going to hand over to Chris Clayton, our Chief Executive now, who will take you through some more details of the plans and what we hope to achieve in the ECITB this coming year. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Linda. And it's great to welcome all of you to today's webinar. Now, I'm just going to go through share some slides with you. And I'm just waiting for that slide permission. There we go. Here it comes. And hopefully you'll all be able to see that slide now. So when we consulted with you in 2019, you may recollect we set out our strategy into 3 pillars. And over the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to give you an idea on of the progress we've made against that, with a focus clearly on 2021. And then I'll hand you over to David Nash, who you met earlier, who'll give you an update on and really have a discussion with you on how we see the challenges facing us for the next strategic period and what our emerging priorities are. And then hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of that in the forums that follow to help shape the development of that work. And so some of you may recollect that early in 2020, as a result of the pandemic, the board reviewed the strategy and they concluded that whilst it remained relevant, ECITB should focus on 3 issues in particular. The first was retention of those early career apprentices and graduates. And many of you have participated in the Train to Retain initiative, which was the main activity we did to support this work, which closed in December last year. I mean, the programme supported over 500 apprentices, trainees and graduates at a cost of £4.6 million. And an independent valuation of the programme undertaken by CBR valued the programme at £6.5 million to industry. But of course, it went a lot deeper than that. And for many of the people who undertook that initiative went on to Train to Retain, it enabled them to expand their skill sets, including into the net zero space, and brought even more value to their employers. And we've identified the lessons from that. We're going to retain some of that activity into the and bring it forward into this year to support the retention initiatives which we're going to run throughout the year. The second priority was area of focus was maintaining the new entrant pipeline, and Linda's already explained about the scholarship program, which is again the main focus of that initiative. We saw apprenticeships drop off the edge of a cliff at the beginning of the pandemic, 50% reduction. And really what we wanted the scholarship program to do, particularly focused on the craft and technician areas, was to maintain enough people flowing into the industry to make up that shortfall. But again, what we've identified from this program, it was successful in doing that in last year and the year before. But we think there's a need to keep this program going beyond the pandemic, because it's important pump priming activity for the growing skills needs across the industry. And the last area, accelerating transition, was really looking at new ways of working and speeding up our support into those, making training more available through online training. We also did direct training support, and we've accelerated the development of our own blended learning strategy. And it is truly a blended learning strategy. We do recognize the fact that particularly a lot of the apprentices and craft, for all the crafts and the technicians, you can't do everything online. There has to be face-to-face, there has to be workshop time. So that's really the format we're looking at with our blended learning strategy, and something you'll hear more about later. Alongside those focus areas, 2021 saw a real recovery in training across the industry. And for us, we saw it manifest in the demand for grant support exceeding our initial expectations. And we funded more than £26 million of grant support to help address the skills gaps and shortages across 2021. And just taking some highlights from those strategic pillars and looking first at the foundations. In her opening remarks, Linda mentioned the importance of our role as advocates of the ECI to the home nation's governments to influence policy development. And key to achieving that influence is evidence, which was a driver for our first workforce census last year. And I'd like to thank all of you who supported this work. It's been really well received, not only in government, but with a lot of our wider stakeholders as well. I mean, the census captured data from over 50% of our in-scope establishments, employing over 45,000 workers. And this data has been used to develop a really clear image of the current landscape across the 8 sectors we represent. Now, we've published 5 reports analysing that census data, and if you've not yet seen them, they're all on our website. So there are sector-specific reports as well as a general conclusions report as well. And so I think well worth looking at. But a few of the headlines from the overall census, I think we've all discussed them before, and it's a common issue that we face about the age of the workforce. I think this data from the census really lends some fact to that problem. And indeed, it's a growing problem, because from our last work in this area in 2017, 31% of our workforce was over the age of 50. And that's grown to 38%, more than a third of the workforce over 50 in 2022. And I think, the numbers coming in at the lower end are not enough to meet what we're going to see as a significant outflow. The other one I just want to highlight from here before we move on to the next point is around the workforce growth. And you can see from that chart in the center of the slide that the workforce dropped significantly, not surprisingly, during 2020 and 2021. And the employers expect it to rebound by the end of 2023. And in the case of SMEs, they're expecting a small amount of growth as well. So those are employer expectations about how the workforce will get back. And then we can overlay that with, and David will talk about it later, with some of the work coming downstream and the much larger numbers needed and the further growth that's going to be needed and how we might address that. But going back to the foundations, I'm not going to go through all these points, but I just also like to highlight some of the work with government. I think it is important that we work closely with governments, you know, the home nations governments, to try and influence policies. And we've seen a real growth of that, of them consulting with us in 2021. You know, we're part now of the Construction Skills Delivery Group, a joint BAYS DFE group. We took part in the Green Jobs Task Force in the COP26 Green Careers events chaired by the Minister. And we've had a lot of engagement with DFE on T-levels, particularly in making the case for simulated environments for industrial placements. And I know a number of you have helped us do that, and thank you very much. D&I continues to be a priority. We need that diverse workforce, not just to help how we operate, but it's also to grow the numbers for the future as well. And I'm really proud to say that in 2021, we supported almost 3,000 learners as they undertook D&I training. And that activity will play an increasingly prominent part of this year's business plan, as well as the strategy, which we're looking at for the period of 23 to 25. In terms of meeting the current skills needs, this is really where the majority of our effort goes and has been going over the last 2 years. And the activities have ranged from grant support, to developing standards, competence assurance, and working with training providers to ensure that training meets, you know, your needs. Now, the pandemic has had, and we've seen a really big impact on the training provider base. And last year, we therefore focused our audit work on supporting providers' improved delivery of training, with 176 provider audits taking place. And we really did focus those on providers with the most need. And we intend to continue that focus this year because we know there's some growth coming in requirements, in workforce growth coming, and we need that training provider base to be able to support that growth. Moving on to one of the most important areas, of course, is in current skills is new entrants. And this slide gives you a good summary of activity in 2021. And as I've already discussed from the census information, we know that we've got the numbers leaving our industry through retirement, but also through career change, are outweighing those numbers of new entrants. And it is a complex problem. It's going to require some long-term methodical and collaborative solutions. But the new entrants, whether they're from education, straight out of education, or from other sectors of the economy, are very important. That's not, of course, to underestimate the need to retain the current workforce. So as well as train to retain, we also provided support last year to upskill the workforce and create some more inclusive workplace cultures, which we think and hope will help retention, as well as attract the new generation drawn from a wider and more diverse talent pool. We also know that attraction of the industry is a big issue. Now, as many of you will know, that the Industrial Training Act means that our focus has to be on post-school age. But of course, the attraction starts when people are at school. So we address the attraction issue by partnering with other organisations, and particularly Engineering UK, so that engineering construction careers and routes are much more visible to school age children, to maximise the appeal of the industry and to try and draw in a wider audience to the work that we do. We're going to continue those collaborative pieces of work throughout 2022 and beyond, again, making sure that we can work to improve the attractiveness of the industry. Now, as you'll see, you see the numbers that we've attracted from this slide. I think the key point for us is, in terms of new entrant starts, this was a 27% increase compared to 2020. So 21 saw a good recovery, back towards the pre-pandemic levels, and we would anticipate that this year we will get to at least the 2019 figure. We may even get beyond it as well. Looking at the preparing for the future, then a key focus for us last year was the growth of our stakeholder engagement across the industrial clusters, government and academia, so that we could better support industry in preparing the workforce for net zero and industry 4.0. And so using the outputs from this engagement and data from our workforce census, we did undertake a detailed analysis of the types of skills that would be required. Now, of course, this is incomplete work because the stage at which many of the net zero projects are is at the early stages. So the focus is on skills, and the understanding is mainly around what are those early stage of planning skills needs. However, we do have a good idea of the skills. We've presented that analysis. If you haven't seen it, we'll make it available. But I think the good news is we have the skills for net zero. Largely, we just need to provide the additional knowledge that supports some of the use of things like hydrogen and for CCS. The key issue for us at the moment, and we're going to be publishing some analysis on this in the next couple of months, is to understand the workforce volume requirements in these areas. And to help employers identify needs and identify opportunities in the new technologies, we've launched our master's level energy transition leadership program in collaboration with Strathclyde and RGU universities, and the first two modules were successfully piloted and positively received through remote delivery last year. That program will be developed and widened as an opportunity for everyone to participate in over this year. We've also tried to modify our scholarship program to get a focus on energy transition, and we established an energy transition scholarship, but we've also then developed our net zero network. And this network is a cross-industry group of over 30 contractors, clients, education providers, as well as policy officers and consultants who are able to give us advice and guidance so that we can support and then pass that on and put it into a package that can support your net zero carbon work. So a real focus on net zero, and you'll hear a bit more about that later. Also throughout last year, we supported the delivery of the industrial strategies, including the North Sea transition deal, the offshore wind sector deal, and the nuclear sector deal. So turning now to how you evaluated us in 2021. So we ran a customer satisfaction survey between September and October last year. It was carried out by independent research consultants, IFF Research. We had about 170 responses ranging across employers, training providers and other stakeholders, so not limited, but government departments, trade associations and regional skills bodies. And the results were broadly encouraging. You can see some of the results on the screen there of how of what was being said about the work we're doing. And overall, we've seen an increase in satisfaction scores from the 2020 customer satisfaction survey. So we're seeing a steady growth, which is good. But not all areas were positive, and there are certainly areas we need to do more work on, and they're covered in the box on the right-hand side. But the first one was e-learning, and I think that has been really brought into a sharp focus in 2020 and 2021, and we did not have a great deal or very well developed e-learning at all. That has now started to change. We did some early work during the pandemic. It was a bit rushed because we were trying to do it at pace, but underpinning all of that has been the development of a really good blended learning strategy with an e-learning aspect to it, and that is being rolled out this year properly, and I think you'll see a considerable development in that area over 2022. The second one was in working collaboratively. You know, stakeholder engagement and collaborative working is important, but there's still more to do. Excuse me. And it's really important that if we want to achieve what we're really looking at in terms of things like connected competence, you know, the competence assurance programs in the project collaboration toolkit and getting those ways of working going, doing attraction, attention, and ED&I, then it's really important that we really further improve our collaborative working practices. And that is very much a mindset that we've adopted, and we'll look to improve on that. So any comments, any thoughts you've got on how we can build that side of our work would be really welcome. And engagement with training providers. We started really changing the nature of our engagement with training providers last year, and we'll continue to build on that. It's important that we again work collaboratively, that we establish a much better environment, because that training provision base is so important to developing the future workforce with the needs that are coming. And it's really important that we have we can help them recover for those areas where they've been particularly badly hit, and support them going forward, and to bring it into a more collaborative and partnership-based system. But overall, I'd say that the results from the survey, you know, say that we largely met our business objectives against the plan, and that employers have recognized the value of what we do as well. And I think that's encouraging, and it's given us much to build on over this year and then into the following strategy period. So this brings me to my final point. And I think the slide here says the words. I mentioned earlier that we spent over £26 million in grant support in 2021. It was a good level of support. It well exceeded our levy income and actually necessitated us in drawing down just over £3 million from our reserves. And it's worth noting that whilst demand is increasing, levy income is dropping. So our levy receipts this year are 7% lower as a result of payroll declines in 2020, 2021. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the industry has shrunk by 7%. In many cases, it's because of the furlough scheme and the limited payments, and people were paid to that limit, and the lack of bonus payments, etc. So whilst we know that the industry has shrunk during the pandemic, we're not yet clear by how much. But as a result of the growing need within the industry, we anticipate we're going to need to spend up to a further £4 million from reserves this year. But even this injection is not going to be sufficient to meet all of the demand that we're going to have, and we're going to have to take some other measures to ensure that we can maintain support across the breadth of our activities. And the two key measures I'm going to highlight here are, the first one is in terms of apprenticeship payments. We're going to revert back to where we were in 2019, which is the more evenly spaced payments for apprenticeship support during the apprenticeship. So the front loading that we introduced on the apprenticeship support payments is going to cease for this year. But the second one is where we're going to reduce grant support, and that's against the graduate support grant, and that's going to reduce from £12,000 to £8,000 for the period. So why target this area might be the question, and we can certainly discuss that in questions if you like to later. But the board takes a balanced approach to funding to ensure that we're able to support activities across the breadth of the industry. New entrants is the single biggest area of funding that we do, with approximately 40% of grant support going on new entrants. And the graduate grant is part of that new entrant spend, and reducing it is to ensure we don't exceed that 40% level. So it's not taking away the support from new entrant support, but it's staying within that budgetary envelope. And there may have to be further changes in year. I mean, if we, for example, had a really large surge in demand for apprenticeships this year, we may have to examine the apprenticeship grant or other spending priorities to keep it in balance. So whilst that might sound a bit of a negative note on which I'm going to end this part, it's nonetheless important that the amount of support being asked for is indicative of an industry that's just coming out of the pandemic and starting to grow again. And 2022, we're going to be continuing to support industry well beyond just those grant lines with our work on net zero and that net zero program, the competence assurance work, the transferability agendas, scholarships, and all those other activities which give us the breadth of support to ensure that we can deliver the value that you need and the training support that you need as the industry landscape changes, particularly in light of the net zero targets that are coming. Okay, so I hope that's been useful. I'm going to hand over now to David Nash, who is going to talk to you about future strategy development and take you through that. But if you've got any questions, please do pop them into the question box and we'll address them as the day progresses. David, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for that. A really helpful update on the work that we've been doing in 2021 and a flavour really of what's coming up this year. I'm going to talk you through now the work that we're doing to develop the new ECITB strategy, which Linda referred to in her opening remarks. And it's important to say that this strategy will be a 3-year strategy from 2023 to 2025, but it's very much set in a longer, a sort of a 10-year horizon. And obviously work's already started on the strategy. We've been having lots of discussions with employers and other stakeholders to inform our thinking, and have been doing some detailed research work also to help us develop the strategy. And as Linda said, the plan is very much to go out to consultation with you in the spring, and we'll touch on the plan shortly in this presentation, and that will follow with the levy consensus exercise with levy payers in the autumn. So I'm now going to just share my screen. Hopefully you'll see that. So first thing I want to say really is we've done a bit of work to look at what are the main challenges and opportunities that industry is going to be facing over that 3-year period and beyond. And I think as you'll all probably realize, and you're probably experiencing this in your companies today, one of the main challenges both currently and is likely to prevail is the issue of workforce availability. So we know employers are reporting skill shortages. In our census that Chris referred to, 53% of employers said that they struggled to fill vacancies, and total hard to fill vacancies represent about 2.5% of the industry's entire workforce. So this issue has been exacerbated in the previous 12 months, and I think we're likely to see it continue, particularly with the uptick in activity, project activity, both conventional and also related to net zero. And obviously we need to do a lot more to help bring in new entrants to the sector. Chris has also talked about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and I think from a business perspective, we know that more diverse workforces help companies innovate, but we also know that as an industry, we need to be widening our talent pool to attract people from different backgrounds in order to plug some of those skill shortages that we expect to see. On the industry front, we know that there's a lot of project activity coming up, and I'll touch on that on the next slide, but it's not all going to be net zero focused. So our view is that the transition to net zero within industry is going to be multi-paced. There are going to be many companies who are fully engaged with net zero project activity and work to decarbonize their own carbon footprint over the next strategy period. But for other parts of our industry, projects will be more of a business as usual type, and it's really important that we're able to support both types of employer, both types of sector. We know technology is having an impact on industry, and we've increasingly have concerns about things like cybersecurity, but there's a lot going on in industry that as a training board we're really keen to get your views on what's affecting you and what that might mean for the workforce and for training. And the third area of challenge and opportunities around the training landscape, really. I think post-pandemic, it's going to be more important than ever before, really, that training is accessible in the right place, at the right time, and in the right medium, and it meets the changing expectations of learners around how they might want to access that training and what type of training that they want. And obviously, training is affected by changes in government policy, things like traineeships and boot camps in England, but also work going on in places in Scotland to develop things like the skills, the Green Skills Wallet, and changes that are being made to the modern apprentices. All of that has implications for you as employers and for us as a training board. So this slide is quite busy, but it's intentionally so, and this really highlights the amount of project activity we're expecting to see over that 10 to 15 year horizon that I mentioned at the start. So here you have listed a range of project activity, but also legislative milestones related to net zero. And a lot going on in the late 2020s. And culminating really for this strategy period in 2030 with things such as 4 CCUS clusters being operational by 2030, and the newly announced ScotWind auction projects, 10 gigawatts worth, being operational by 2032. It's important to say it's not all about energy and it's not all about net zero, and we know that there's a whole range of business as usual activity type projects, EPC both in the UK and overseas, maintenance shutdowns, turnarounds, and a whole range of decommissioning work that we will need to continue to support industry with over the course of the strategy period. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Jenny Young to take you through the next few slides. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, David. So Chris has given you the outline of last year, and David has spoken about the challenges and the opportunities that industry is facing. I just want to expand on 2 of the challenge areas to give you some examples, to explore what we're already doing and some ideas of how we could develop our actions over the next strategy period. So the first of these, which has already been alluded to, is the challenge of workforce volume. And I think the view, certainly within the board and within the organisation, is that this is going to be the most pressing challenge that our strategy from 2023 to 2025 has to address. So the context is obviously the tight labour market, and this is across the whole economy. You only have to look at the news any day really to see that impacts are being felt in all parts of our economy. And you'll appreciate from the horizon slide that David's just shown, the increasing demand for skilled labour is coming both from new projects and from business as usual. And in terms of the new projects investment, a lot of what was on the previous slide is government funded activity, certainly their aspiration, but there will also be a huge amount of private sector investment that will support the decarbonisation agenda. So that's the context for the challenge. In terms of current activity, and again, this is picking up on some of the points that Chris outlined in his performance highlights. Obviously, targeted interventions have been key in terms of building volume. I think we see scholarships as a key vehicle in this area. We've currently got 210 scholars on programme, with tenders just closed for further entry. And I think that mechanism is already proving effective to see transition into the workplace even partway through the programme. So that sort of responsive mechanism that gives us a quicker route to get people into the workplace where they can then develop further, I think is the sort of action that we will continue. Having standardised competence assurance is something that many of you will be aware that we have been championing for a long time and still see this as key. I think both in terms of the the safety and productivity benefits and cost benefits for industry as a whole, but also as an enabler for transferability within sectors and between sectors. So I think that's a key current action that will continue. And as we've alluded to, we're working with governments on a number of fronts, mainly to ensure that our actions as the training board can dovetail effectively with government policy and policy initiatives that are being proposed or already implemented, so that we can make the levy work to best effect and best value. So in terms of future plans, the career strategy, which Chris alluded to earlier on, I think really collaboration is the key watchword in this area, and using the reach of external organisations to amplify the engineering construction industry opportunities to a wider audience. Part of this is to try and reach new audiences. We've spoken a number of times this morning about the diversity and inclusion agenda. That's a current priority that's been placed on us from government, and I think we would like to be more proactive and in terms of influencing those things which are within our control. So the constitution of the new entrant programs, such as the scholarship, I think will be a key area that we'll be looking at. And the final point on there is looking at perhaps more flexible and a wider variety of routes into the industry. What can we do to make it easier for people to come into the industry from whatever their starting point is, and particularly providing progressive pathways so that we can take people in from perhaps a lower base skill level and help them to grow through a series of upskilling interventions. And that would be true for both new entrants and transferees. So that's a taste of workforce volume as we see it currently. Next, I'd like to look at one of the challenge and opportunity areas in terms of preparing for what we know is coming. If you think back to the horizon slide that we saw earlier, this is a 3-year strategy set in a 10-year horizon, and we know that there is a huge amount of growth and change happening as a backdrop to that. So energy transition to net zero is not the only change coming. We've also spoken about digitalization as an example, but it is one of the most significant changes that's going to impact all areas of the supply chain in time. Now, David spoke about the multi-pace transition. For some of you, it's a live area with current projects, and for others, it's perhaps not a priority yet, but it is going to eventually impact every single organisation. So the challenge in this area, I think we see is a combination of labour demand. So again, that's echoing the previous slide in terms of volume, but also looking at the skills requirements, the different skills requirements that there might be. And I think we see those very much as nuances rather than wholesale changes. But it's important that we can act to try and help industry develop seamless transition routes from one part of the industry to the new opportunities that will be coming. In terms of current actions that we've taken, you've already heard this morning about the Energy Transition Technician Scholarship Programme and the Energy Transition Leadership Programme. These are growing interventions that I think the reception of them so far suggests that they are an effective way of helping industry to start to prepare. We're building up our direct engagement with the industrial clusters. We've had some organisational changes internally over the past year to give us some direct resource who is focusing on embedding us more into the clusters so that we can act as a key skills partner. And you've also heard about the Net Zero Network, which is an example of one of the ways in which we are actively collaborating and trying to share knowledge externally. So in future, the industrial clusters are something that we will definitely focus on. As I say, we've got dedicated resource now who, as part of their role, is initiating conversations with the clusters, and we would like to be involved as a key partner to helping develop the skill solutions that will service the needs within those clusters. As part of that, the skills mapping will continue as the project maturity increases externally. We will reflect the changing knowledge of skills within the analysis that we've done to date, and we are actively working this year on the demand modelling, which is probably the hardest question to answer, but that's a piece of work we're starting now, and that will we will continue and flex that over the coming years. And we already have active conversations ongoing with the Department for Education and with Scottish Government in terms of how can our training solutions dovetail with policy areas that apply in both those settings, so that we can again deploy the levy effectively to best effect. I'd like to close off this part of the session by just giving you a little bit more detail of what's coming in terms of the strategy development. So we're currently in the first phase of development. So this is the board-led activity, which obviously staff are heavily supporting, to evolve what are the challenges and how we should define our strategic response to those challenges. In April and May, we'll be running the series of strategy consultation workshops, which I'll set out on the next slide. And following those workshops, where we'll gather feedback from a whole range of stakeholders, we will then refine, go through an iteration process to refine the strategy based on that feedback. And that will then set the scene for the autumn levy consultation. So as in 2019, we will launch a final strategy, and the delivery of that strategy will then form the basis of the levy rates that the board will consult with industry on, and that consultation process will run during September and October. So that's the timeline for the year in terms of the strategy development and the subsequent levy consensus. And then finally, this just gives you a sense of the plans for the strategy workshop. So these will run over a 6-week period, April and May. And really today is just to give you a heads up so that you can note which ones are happening within your region for employers. We'll also be holding specific workshops for providers and sessions with government stakeholders in Westminster, Scotland and Wales. So someone in your organisation will receive the invitation to attend the relevant workshop. That's a planning process that's actively going on at the moment. So that's the conclusion of the strategy presentation. We're now going to go into a question and answer session. So this is obviously an opportunity for you to ask questions of Linda and the members of the senior leadership team. So as we move into that, I'd just like to share these particular questions that you might like to consider, and you might like to put in thoughts in the chat box or raise any new issues with us either here or in the subsequent regional forums that are happening later today. So reflect on the challenges and opportunities that we've presented. Are they, do you recognise what they are? Do you think they're right, or are there areas where we need to tune what we're doing? Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That's been a really useful tour of where we are with the strategy development work. Can I now ask, and I see people are reappearing, so we've now got Linda back on screen alongside Chris, and also Jenny and Andy Brown, our Director of Operations. Just to go through some of the questions that we've been getting in, I'm hoping you can see everyone and you can't see my screen.
Yeah, all fine, David.
All fine, lovely. Okay, technology is definitely getting the better of me this morning. So a few questions in, and we are overrunning, so I'll try and get as many of these covered as possible before I hand back to Chris at the end to wrap up. First question, I think really, Linda, is for you. So we've heard from Jenny and myself about the work going on the new strategy, but what's the board's view? What are the board saying? What are the board thinking are the key issues that the ECITB needs to be addressing during the strategy period?
Well, thank you, David. I think, you know, you've heard it from everybody that the skills shortage is coming, and we really have to tackle that because we know the lead time to get new trained people is a couple of years. So we have to be a bit ahead of the game and think about it. And of course, our dilemma as a board is we have to work within our budget. You know, we have to try and address skills shortages across a whole spectrum, not only of sectors, but of also types of entrants, you know, hence balancing graduate with crafts and skills. So it's really difficult, but I think to try and get as many new people in that support particularly the changing industries, the new industries, is one of the things the board has been grappling with. And certainly doing that within the budget we have. You know, we're looking very hard at reserves. We're using reserves as much as we can, you know, against good governance. So I think that's one of the things. And then I want to emphasize Jenny's diversity and inclusiveness. You know, there are untapped resources that could work in our sector that have been underutilized, and I feel very strongly about that. I know Jenny does too, I know we all do. And there must be a way of encouraging them into our industry. So those are just two of the things. And then changing training so that it's fit for the next decade. You know, I think the pandemic has showed us new ways of delivering training, but we're not there yet. And we need to work with all of you out there about what are the right ways, the balance between face-to-face, remote, what's the most efficient way, how can we make our money go further? So those are just, I think, three of the big things that the board are, you know, constantly worrying about. I'll leave it at that for now. There are other things, but if you ask me what's the three things that keep me awake at night, it's probably those: more people, a diverse workforce, and, you know, funding and adapting to the new industries.
Thanks, Linda. That was brilliant. Jenny, we've had a question in, quite a specific question from Duncan Salmon, who's asked, can you let us know how we can see the skills mapping analysis for net zero? And obviously we've done some work that's available. Perhaps say a few words about our future plans in that area too.
Yes, thank you. So the analysis was shared in several external presentation forums last year. So we can certainly publish a presentation that covers the position as we understand it at the moment. And I think as our engagement, particularly our direct engagement with the clusters, increases now that we are, you know, we're actively focusing on that. I think that route plus the input that we will be able to gather in areas that we can test with the net zero network interaction will help us to refine that analysis. We know it's not complete yet. I mean, it builds on the research report that we published in March 2020, which looked at the initial impact of the technologies. But if you think, you know, it's a case of, you know, known knowns and unknown unknowns. It's that sort of situation. So a lot of the well understood knowledge of changing skills is still centered around the feed phases of projects. There's less clarity as to what the specific changes, particularly in the construction phase, will be. So we'll evolve that knowledge as projects progress, and I think really just try and keep ahead of the curve enough that we can respond in time to anticipate demand and put interventions in place that address them. But I think the initial publication will be, if we put the presentations that have been shared externally, we can get those up on the net zero page on the website.
Thanks, Jenny. We've had a few questions. I won't read them all out, but a few questions related to the changes that we're making to the graduate grant and the apprenticeship grants. I mean, they're all on the same theme. You know, how are we reconciling the fact that we've got an aging workforce and we need to get more people in to the industry with the changes that we're making, particularly the reduction to the graduate grant? Andy, did you want to pick up on that particular set of questions?
Sure, thanks, David. Yeah, so it feels incongruent to be leaning into new entrants due to the skills shortages and making real cuts to the graduate grant and some changes to the apprenticeship grant. First of all, on the apprentice grant, we're not making any cuts to the apprentice grant at this stage. We need to be clear on that. What we are doing is we are returning the phasing of the apprentice grant to what it was before we enhanced the commencement grant to incentivize employers who were maybe wavering around a commitment to an apprentice. The changes we made in 2019. Apprentice numbers are back to what they were in that sort of 18-19 period, and so we feel to enable us to do as much as we need to do in 2022, that rephasing that grant helps us do that. So we're not cutting the apprentice grant. However, as Chris said, if the signs are that our forecasted apprentice intake significantly increases, then we may have to relook at that. The graduate grant, looking at the analysis, the graduate intakes are generally meeting business need. The feeling that our conclusion is that the graduate grant doesn't really incentivize numbers, and so it supports industry in developing the graduates against UK spec. And so cutting that grant, we don't think will impact the numbers of graduates coming into the industry. But what it will do, it'll enable us to prioritize funding in areas that are still critical to industry, such as the funding of the new net zero skills program that we're scoping out at the moment. So exactly as Chris said, we've got reduced levy revenues, we've got significant increase in demand, competing priorities, and so we have to do something. And looking at the analysis on an individual employer basis, the reduction in the graduate grant scheme against individuals' employer support is not impactful. It doesn't really impact those employers. And so it's a hard decision, and one which we accept won't be popular, particularly within certain areas of the industry. But exactly as Chris said, we've had to make those decisions so that we can do as much as we can to meet the needs of the industry over the next few years.
Thank you, Andy. That's very helpful. I'm conscious we're slightly overrunning, and I want to give the last word to Chris, but there's one final question that I think it's just worth raising from Tony Wally, which is about our engagement with clients. So obviously, as levy payers most important stakeholders are their clients. What are we doing as the training board to engage with clients? Chris, did you want to pick up on that one, and maybe Andy could pitch in too?
Well, why don't we start with Andy, because then I can say a couple of words and then wrap up at the same time, given that we're pressed for time.
Good idea.
Thanks, Chris.
Andy.
It's a great question, Tony. Thank you. And I have not known a period of time where clients have been so interested in what the ECITB can offer. They are very concerned about workforce capacity. They are very concerned about competence on their sites. And so for the first time, we're starting to build a sort of a coalition of discussion with the client base and the contractor base, and that's what we need to do to take forward. We're already doing it in the area of upstream oil and gas with Connected Competence. We have a significant number of clients sit on the Connected Competence Council, helping steer the route towards standardization of base technical competence. We now want to replicate that in those areas where we've got high centers of gravity. So north of England, for example, we have got meetings coming up in the next quarter with clients, and we'll bring major contractors into those discussions. In fact, tomorrow I'm at the Humber Engineering Managers Forum with the refineries and the major contractors to talk about capacity building and, critically, standardization of competence to support transferability. So we are making inroads with the client base. We've got to be sensitive that we don't tread on the toes of our contractors, of course, and we need to be collaborative in that approach.
Thanks, Andy. It's worth noting too that just to say, sorry, Chris, that obviously within the industrial clusters, we're reaching out to many of the client and project lead entities on those cluster projects too at this stage. So that work will continue. Chris, last word for you.
Yeah,
on clients and wrapping up.
Just picking that up as well from Andy before I go into that is just say, you know, we've always engaged with clients in different ways, but it's often been on individual training areas or specific issues. You know, the project controls is another great example where quite a lot of clients and others, non-clients, use the standards we've developed there as well as others. But what we're bringing together now and increasingly over 2021, and we intend to push that further forward, is a much broader collaborative base, because the challenges we've got to overcome and that we're facing over the next few years, and I know it's not all about net zero, but actually net zero is going to impact the whole marketplace. We're already seeing how much nuclear is impacting the marketplace on skills needs. When you add all the decarbonisation activity that goes with that, with all the other growth in other sectors, everyone is really getting to a point where we've got to come up with collaborative solutions, whether you're clients, contractors, whoever, to address some of the skills issues. And we've got to work with government on that as well. And the government's got to support. And we're seeing some movement in those areas. You know, discussions with DFE, they've now brought in a future skills unit to start going back to getting some of the hard evidence to support the points we're making. The evidence that we collect from you all adds to that. And it's really important that we continue to do that and lobby and get those results from government. But we've got to engage across the spectrum, which is what we're trying to do, and bring format where we bring everyone together, because without it, we're not going to meet the demand and the need to deliver the infrastructure and the government's ambitions of net zero. So I'll stop on that one now and just really finish by saying thank you very much for here. I know there's more questions to answer, especially on the grant support side of it, but we're going into the regional forums now, and that'll be an opportunity to delve into a bit more detail and ask more of those questions. But thank you very much for being here this morning, and I look forward. I'm moving into the Scottish Regional Forum, I believe, but if anyone wants to pick up with me separately and after this, really happy to do that. Just let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I think we're reconvening at 11:30 for most of the regional forums. I know one's after lunch, but you should have all received an invite from your account manager with a link to those sessions. So we'll see you all in the subsequent forums, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.